Welcome to Leaders and Laggards.
Hi, and welcome to episode 15 of Leaders and Laggards. I'm Dave Swenson. I'll be leading the discussion, and I've got along with me again this week, Jeff Custer and Ken Riches. And we will be tackling the topic of leadership in the 21st century. So maybe just some background on where I came up with this topic. Recently, I was listening to and it was a couple-year-old podcast, but it's a podcast that focuses primarily on Industry 4.0, or maybe even breaching on the topics of things like artificial intelligence and these kinds of things. And so the host of the podcast brought up from his perspective and the perspective of his consultancy that most of the leaders that they work with probably should have retired at least a decade ago, if not longer, and are woefully unprepared to lead, I guess, what he referred to as the industry of the future, or the business of the future. And his examples of the industry or the business of the future are examples like Amazon and Tesla. And so that was kind of the genesis. Has leadership, or the need for leadership, how is it changing as we get into what's almost a quarter of the way into this century?
Yeah.
And so my first question really was, is leadership still relevant in the new economy or the new technology? And that's probably the same question that was being asked at the beginning of the last century as well. But taking into consideration your answer to that, whether it's still relevant or relevant maybe in its current format, why do you say that? So let's start with you, Ken.
Yeah, I watched the video clip you sent, and as part of that, and I'm not sure if you want to give a reference to that podcast more specifically for if any of the listeners want to go through and look at it.
So yeah, the podcast is put on by a group called Solutions 4.0, and the host is a gentleman named Walker Reynolds, and I actually have a connection with Walker on LinkedIn. I have a lot of respect for him, but just the subject matter of this podcast, brought to my attention, this is probably a topic we should be discussing.
And so I kind of looked at it, and when I got done reviewing that clip that you had sent as preparation, and I really looked at that, and I think that from a perspective as an organization where they're trying to go, that if you don't have the vision and you're not keeping up with current technology as part of your strategic planning and factoring that in, then maybe you don't belong in that role. But I think that's more of an individual thing. Is there really a place for leadership? I think absolutely. It doesn't really matter how integrated your processes and from your ERP, down to your delivery execution system and your fulfillment and everything else. No matter how integrated that is, it still takes people. And with people, there needs to be leadership. And I think that, some of the key aspects that come to mind are when there is something that happens unexpectedly, do you have the skill sets to help with problem solving, with coaching, with motivating? Do you have the right people in the right seats? And then to me, those are all key aspects of leadership that no matter how technology changes, it's still, for as long as there's people doing the role, I really believe that there is absolutely a place for leadership going forward in the new economy.
All right. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I strongly second that. You think you look back in history, and Dave, you kind of brought that up. But you look back in history, asking this question, as long as society's been organized, there's been somebody that was leading. And I think for a lot of the reasons that Ken talks about is somebody rises to a leadership role because in situations, trying to run things by committee maybe can work some of the time, but I think it really, when you start talking about strategy and some of the things Ken talked about, I just think trying to lead by committee, I think falls really short. Maybe kind of a quirky thought I have, Dave, about this. If you look at even look at nature around us, and if you watch natural processes, they don't build up, they actually devolve. They become more disorganized, not more organized.
Right.
And I think that's a pretty good analogy to what happens when you try to run things by committee. Is I don't see that you have that vision and that strategy to move forward. I think you devolve because you don't have that. When you get to that critical crossroads, Ken, there's somebody that's got to decide. And if you have 100 people doing it, I think you're going to struggle.
Yeah, I guess, I think you guys touched on most everything I would have. But I did think about it as you were talking. One thing I forgot to mention in the primer to the question, and even when I sent things out, and I probably should give a little full disclosure, I did spend almost a year and a half working for a company that was, working in that IIoT space, right? So they did, podcasts and those kinds of things frequently. And one of the podcasts I was able to listen on, they talked a lot about the gray wave, right? The departure of the baby boomers and these kinds of things. And there wasn't a lot of discussion about, well, what's next? What does that mean to industry? But what I did hear was some fair amount of context about, in some cases, almost good riddance. And there's going to be less need for that type of leadership or leadership at all in the future anyway, because, we're going to automate everything. And so my pushback has always been, well, as long as we're going to have people involved, we're going to need some leadership, right?
I mean, Dave, several weeks ago, we talked about leadership styles.
Right.
And so when I hear that statement that they're putting out, one of the things that's hard to do when we have these kind of discussions is you kind of broad brush generalize things. And to say every baby boomer is this, they're,
right.
Like we talked about autocratic style or whatever, to say everyone is like that, to me, is just pretty much a gross misrepresentation of
Absolutely.
reality.
Moving on to kind of part two, and maybe it was a stretch to relate the two, but when you talk about the new thing when it comes to leadership, right? There's always a new book, a new coach, a new methodology, a new model. And boy, if you'll just try this, right? This is the answer we've all been waiting for. I guess my question is, if someone's enticed by the shiny object of the new thing, what are some recommendations, I guess, that we would give to the listeners to say, before you latch onto that new thing, maybe keep these things in mind, right? Before you buy that next book or a ticket to that next seminar, what have you, right? What are the things that people ought to keep in mind before they're latching onto the newest and greatest? And let's start with you, Jeff.
Yeah, my first reaction when I was looking at your question, the statement came into my head: "There's nothing new under the sun." I think that applies here. That the core principles around leadership, we might want to repackage them, make them prettier, twist them around a little bit. But when you get down to the core, I think the principles of good leadership don't really change over time. So, I think as people look at these new things, I mean, I like reading the new books. I think all three of us probably like doing that.
Sure.
Because I like to see how people repackage things, and at least when you're buying a book, you're not spending a whole bunch of money. So even if it's bad, I don't feel too bad about it versus paying hundreds of dollars to go to some seminar.
Right.
But I just think, to people listening, go at this probably with a pretty critical eye. Not to say you shouldn't do it, but go at it with a critical eye and really weigh it against what's the tried and true, what's worked for a long, long time really well. And is this really something new, or is it just packaged up different?
How about you, Ken?
Yeah, I thought that, I think it's, if you're looking at what someone is offering, is what is their experience? Where are they coming from? Is there enough information included for you to build a level of trust and to believe that they have credibility? And, their positions on things, as you read the summary of what they're offering, you look at some of their clips of previous seminars or things like that. Does it make you think? Because if it's not making you think, then is it really something that you're going to get value out of? And I think that the final thing is that whenever you look at the new strategy for trying to do marketing and how you do things, and it's you're trying to create a story, and you always want to make your customer to be the hero of the situation. So are you, what that really means is, are you going to help, or is this material going to help you solve an immediate pain that you have and give you results that are going to improve your organization or what you're trying to do? And I think it really comes down to is a results expectation.
All I would add to that is, I'll tell clients really early in the conversation, I'm not offering anything new, because to Jeff's point, I think the principles and practices of authentic leadership, they're tried and true. What I will maybe offer that is a bit different, or maybe it's not, maybe I think it's more different than it is I really take that methodology of let's learn it, then let's apply it, and then let's reflect upon what it is that we learned and applied and adjust to our environment, right? Because what worked for the last person isn't necessarily going to be the right answer for you and your team. So I guess that's my real difference would be, when you're thinking about something new, is it really new? And like you were saying, how are you sure you're going to get value out of it? Because yeah, we all like to go to Florida in March for that next seminar potentially, but you're going to be away from the people that you really need to be applying these principles and practices with anyway, unless you bring your whole team with you. And even then, it's in a sealed environment. It's not the environment that you work in each and every day. So you really can't practice what you've just learned. So I would just be cautious, and I'd really tame my expectations no matter what your best friend or the reviews say. There probably isn't a lot of drastically new information. It's repackaged. It's snazzier than the last person came up with, maybe. But if there's not an application or an opportunity to apply it and learn, I guess I'd be thinking real hard if that's the money I need to be spending or not. So looks like Jeff maybe is having some issues again.
Man, can you hear me, Dave?
I can hear you, just can't see you.
Well, yeah, I don't know. My video
right.
video says it doesn't want to cooperate, but I'm glad you can hear me.
Well, we can hear you, so that's good, right? So then we'll head right into this last leg of the segment then.
Probably better that they can't see me anyway.
maybe.
Maybe we should alter the cameras off.
Yeah.
So whether it's politics or business, we have all been impacted recently by leadership abilities and or the lack thereof, right? There's no denying that. And that's going to continue to be what happens going forward. So for the remainder of the 21st century, because again, we're almost a quarter of the way into it, what are the things that you would encourage our listeners to keep in mind if they want to be successful, right? If they want to build that team or that industry that's going to last for the next couple centuries, or maybe even reinvigorate the team they're already on. I mean, what are the things that you'd recommend they keep in mind for the remainder of this century? And Jeff, if you're still there, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, Dave, I think I go back to what I said in the previous question, that it really, I think, is about the basics. Leaders that can focus on the basic traits of leadership. I think skilled communicators are one of the things that probably for me tops the list. Do you have Do you have leaders that are good two-way communicators? They're good at communicating to people, but even more so, they are great listeners. And I think that to me is one of the top. But I think there's probably just that set of traits that I don't think change over time. And leaders that are going to be effective, whether it's today or 50 years from now, I just don't foresee those traits changing a lot, because Ken, you talked about it. It really ends up being about relationship. As long as there's more than one person involved, you have relationship, and leadership really is about managing and working through effective relationships.
Ken?
So I think some of the things that are key for moving forward is you have to have a philosophy, not only for yourself, but for your leadership and executive team, for a philosophy of continuous learning. I think that hiring people that are smarter than you, or at least with the different perspectives, is key. I think one of the key, and I think when on the first question, one of the things I talked about was the importance of strategic planning and being able to really have that vision and to be aware of what is going on around you. And I think that a strong focus on strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and doing that SWOT analysis and having a 3 to 5 year plan or even beyond is important. Listening to your team, and as part of that listening, setting up the organization to fail fast. And as long as there is not anything above a low or moderate business risk, be willing to let people make mistakes, because that's really where true learning comes from. So to me, it's back to what Jeff was saying earlier on one of the responses. And you too, Dave, there's not really new philosophy, but it's making sure that you've taken some of the lessons learned and not repeating the mistakes that have been made in the past. And I think that a key of that is, again, having vision, having the right people, and listening to the team. And at the end of the day, as Jeff said, you have to be willing to make the decision. And if you're the decision maker, get your inputs, but make a decision and move on.
I think you guys have hit on most of what I would have said. The fundamentals are there. The principles and practices are there. If I were going to recommend anything to the listeners that wanted to continue to be successful through the remainder of this century, I guess I'd focus on where you started some of your conversation, Ken. Let's keep in mind that as a leader, I need to be setting the vision. I need to see it first. And with that in mind, I need to keep my eyes on the ball with what's coming down the pipe with regards to things like technology. And if I'm not willing to do that, maybe I'm not in the right seat for the 21st century. But keep in mind what's happening, what's going to happen. You realize that you're going to be the trendsetter, hopefully, in some of these cases. And one of the things that some of this new technology is giving us is an opportunity to really simulate the impact of decisions in a safe environment. So, use the technology that we now have at our fingertips to maybe simulate things that you could have only talked about in the past. But you have to see it first. You have to be setting the vision. So keep that in mind. Any other thoughts for the listeners before we call it a wrap?
Dave, I just go back, interesting kind of the introduction, the podcast seemed like it offered up, Amazon and Tesla as examples of this. And I just find it kind of interesting that they would pick those two examples, because you have two, I think, pretty strong leaders that formed those companies.
Yes.
And so that's maybe I'm a little perplexed about kind of how that fits, because it doesn't seem like Amazon and Tesla, to me, are examples. But maybe could be I just don't quite get it. But those companies are where they're at because of the two men that really founded and got those companies going. Without them, without their vision and their drive to get where they wanted to go, I don't see how either one of those companies probably even exists.
Yeah, and I think that was part of Walker's message, was to say that the reason specifically that Tesla and Amazon are the companies they are is because of Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. But that being said, I think it is still questionable to say, a large percentage of other leaders maybe should have retired 20 years ago. Because I'm still not settled on Elon or Jeff as a person I'd want to follow.
Yeah.
Right? I like some of the results they're getting, but I know people that work at Tesla, and I'm telling you, I would not want to work at Tesla.
Yeah. And I mean, I like I said at the beginning, I think one of the things you got to look at is say, are there baby boomer generation people that should have retired? Sure. But there's people that are in the current generations running businesses that should go away as well.
Yeah, agreed.
I don't think, that's why I said I don't think it's unique to it. It's not to me a generational thing. It really is, probably gets down to what we've talked about, philosophy and style of the leader versus the age of the leader.
Anything to add, Ken?
Nope. I think last question pretty much, here's, if you want to be successful moving forward, here are some of the things you should do.
Well, thank you both for your contribution. I continue to get things out of every episode every time we get together, and I hope that the listeners are getting value as well, and looking forward to next week or the next time we get together.
All right.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks for watching, and remember, leadership matters.